Good morning, everybody, and we have a jam-packed NBA show for you today over here on Stokastic, because there's 11 NBA games, and the injury report Adam and I were just talking about right before we started. It's absurd. If you guys look at the Pelicans today, I think Adam said it best. It's kind of like a March slate where we got this Pelicans team. Everybody's either out or questionable, and it's a 10 o'clock start time. So there's a lot of moving parts here. While you guys come in, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Shout out to Prize Picks, the sponsor of today's show. Now, Adam, this kind of strikes me as the kind of slate where I don't really feel like I'm going to be playing guys who project well. I'm going to be playing a lot of guys who project really well on a points per dollar basis because it seems like there's going to be an insane amount of value.
Yeah, today kind of seems like the opposite of yesterday, where pricing was really tight, and that's not a knock on pricing today. It seems fine, but you're just going to have a lot more value opening up today. We really didn't get much yesterday. What value did open up had already been there, and the sites, particularly DraftKings, had already adjusted for it. So it just became really, really difficult to have plays like you really loved. And that's why you saw like so much ownership coming into Keegan Murray and Desmond Bane. Like, they were good plays, but on a slate like today, they would just be like pretty normal plays. I think yesterday they just stood out as phenomenal plays. And so, yeah, I'm with you. I think this is back to a more normal NBA slate in terms of the way we're going to be able to build.
Yeah, and just a preview for some of the stuff we're going to be talking about in a little bit here. The Pelicans injury report. Zion Williamson questionable, CJ McCollum questionable, Herb Jones questionable, Jose Alvarado questionable, Dyson Daniels questionable, which becomes relevant when everybody on the team is injured. Then Brandon Ingram and Kira Lewis are both out. So, I mean, this could be one of those games where the team only has the 8 active players that are needed to field a team. So we're going to get right into it. There's a lot to talk about, starting with the Atlanta Hawks against the Detroit Pistons. Now, starting on the Atlanta side of the game, we've got DeJounte Murray, Trae Young. Both of them have found ways to coexist and individually find upside. But as far as the role players on this team go, it's going to be hard for me to want to get to any of them today just because it seems like we're going to have so much value. But Trae Young, DeJounte Murray, how do they look as pay-up options on a slate that should have a lot of opportunity to spend up?
Yeah, I mean, Atlanta feels like one of those teams we were just talking about, where I'm obviously happy to get Trae Young into lineups. I'm happy to get DeJounte Murray into lineups. They're both really good. They both have really high ceilings, but they're playing on a healthy Atlanta team. They have each other both active, and that's just, barring a complete mispricing, which there isn't, that's just going to make them look like secondary options because you have so many guys that are playing or are likely to be playing without main pieces. So, so far this year, Young has been very good. Murray's been solid. Young's at 1.32 DraftKings points per minute. Murray's at 1.2. 33.5% usage rate for Young, 40% assist percentage, 23% usage and a 29% assist percentage for Murray, also a 10% rebounding percentage and 3.6 steals per 100 possessions. So Murray's still doing, his normal thing, but as long as both of these guys are active on slates like this, they're just going to look like secondary options.
Yeah, and that's once again going to be something that's going to become really pertinent as we go through this slate. Is a lot of the pay up options are going to be easy to get to, but a lot of the role players, they're just not going to be relevant once we get some of this news start to drop because there's going to be so much points per dollar value. There's just not going to be a need to play guys like John Collins, say, who might look okay maybe, but later on in the day when we're actually building lineups, I just doubt I would get to any of them. Now, talking about the other side of the game with the Pistons, there is potential for some value here because for the second consecutive day, we've got Jaden Ivey, or the second consecutive slate with the Pistons. We got Jaden Ivey on the injury report. So he missed last game. He ended up being a late scratch. It created some opportunity. Nobody really came through, at least not from a value standpoint. But if Jaden Ivey is out, are there any players that you would want to get to? It was Corey Joseph who started last game and looked terrible and out of shape.
Yeah, did not look good. Killian Hayes didn't do anything either. The best value play last game ended up being Isaiah Livers from this team. But if Ivy is out, you are going to get minutes available. Killian Hayes still 3,600, Corey Joseph 3,800, Livers coming in at 3,700. Looking at their rotation last game, like you said, you got Joseph starting. He quickly picked up 2 fouls and went to the bench, but he still ended up playing 32 minutes. Killian Hayes only played about 16 minutes off the bench. Livers played 23. Diallo only played about 15. So I still think Corey Joseph would be an okay value if Ivy sits. He's still 3,800, and you're talking about 32 minutes of someone that averages around 3/4 of a fantasy point per minute. So never going to get excited about Corey Joseph, but that is a value piece that would open up, I think, if Jaden Ivey sits.
And the thing that stood out the most to me about last game without Jaden Ivey in the picture, Kate Cunningham had a 39.6% usage rate. He's $8,000 on DK, on FanDuel, he's 7,500. I know he's gotten off to a little bit of a slow start to the season, last game notwithstanding, where he was great. But I think we could expect a lot of usage to go to Cade if Ivy doesn't play. And depending where his ownership lands, he would be somebody that I'd be getting to at a pretty good clip on this slate, even with there being other value open up. He's a little bit underpriced, particularly if Jaden Ivey is out, because that was a lot of usage he took last game.
Yeah, so he's up to 56 minutes now without Ivy on the floor this year, 118 possessions, and he has a 40% usage rate and 26.5% assist percentage. But overall this year, he's got a 30% usage rate. He's just shot really poorly. We've talked about that, 28% assist percentage. Even if Ivy is in, I think Cunningham's a reasonable secondary option in tournaments just because of the upside he gives you at 8K. But if Ivy's out, I do think it's a bump for Cunningham, because if you're going to replace Jaden Ivey with Corey Joseph, obviously that's not remotely close in terms of usage. Joseph this year has an 11.3% usage rate. Jaden Ivey's at 23.1%. That's a lot of usage available, and you assume the bulk of it's probably just going to go to Cade Cunningham.
Yeah, that's how I see it as well. And we saw it last game, 40% usage rate, 7,500 on FanDuel, way too cheap of a price. Even the 8K on DK, a little bit too cheap if Jaden Ivey's out. So he'd be somebody that I'd be getting to for sure without Ivy in the mix. Next game here, the Charlotte Hornets against the Orlando Magic. From the Charlotte side of the game, Cody Martin, not expected to play tonight. Terry Rozier, not expected to play. LaMelo Ball, he is still out. He's expected to be out for an extended period of time, but they're listing the injuries as if they're day-to-day for him. But without all of those guys, we're seeing extra usage go to players like Gordon Hayward. Dennis Smith Jr. started last game, and he ended up playing. He had a really big fantasy game. A lot of it did come in overtime, which ended up helping him reach his ceiling. But honestly, we're expected to see a lot of value, a lot of options. Does anything for you stand out to Charlotte with the players that are currently out?
I think that there is just a lot of upside here amongst mid-range guys. And, they're not value in the sense that they're free. But Dennis Smith Jr. for his career is about a fantasy point per minute guy. He's $6,300, played about 31 minutes in regulation, 37 minutes in overtime last game. Potentially could play more. He dealt with a little bit of foul trouble in the first half. So he still looks reasonable. I don't think he should be pulling 25% ownership like he is right now. That's probably a bit too much, but certainly a good mid-range option. And the same can be said for Hayward and Oubre, who should see increased usage as well. Oubre was really disappointing last game. Hayward was solid. But so far this year, limited sample without Rozier on the floor, 22% usage rate and a 34% assist percentage for Smith, 27.8% usage rate and a 20.5% assist percentage for Hayward. And then Oubre coming in with a 25.5% usage rate, not getting assists, but rebounding well. So all three of these guys, I think, have very high ceilings at modest price tags.
Yeah, once again, I'm going to agree with you also on the Dennis Smith Jr. point. I do think we have to take a lot of the ownership projections this early in the day with a grain of salt, just because so much is going to change once we get later on into the day and more players get ruled out and there's updates with all that. But 25% for Dennis Smith Jr. seems crazy to me. In the build I ran this morning, I got around 10% with all the news we have right now. So 25% seems a little much. I thought it was a little much for the last game also, and then he ended up having a ceiling game, but wouldn't have gotten there if it wasn't for the overtime. We've also
he didn't do much in overtime. He got there in regulation.
Did he? I thought he had like 5 fantasy points in overtime.
I mean, I know he was at like 36 or something going into overtime.
Well, the other guys, Kelly Oubre, Gordon Hayward, same. Like, I think these guys are viable. They all just look a little bit overowned right now. Dennis Smith Jr., 25%, Hayward, 19%, Oubre, 16%. Are any of these guys ones that you do think you would be overweight to, at least as of now?
I mean, the way the ownership looks right now, I don't think I would be overweight. I think it's more likely I just kind of get around the field on those guys. 16% ownership coming into Oubre, 19 to Hayward. They all just look like they're about where they should be, if not a little bit overowned. But, again, somebody being slightly overowned doesn't mean I'm not going to get to them. It's just, I'm probably not going to just be jamming them in like I would if they were getting like 8% ownership or something.
And there's a lot of ownership on the other side of this game also for the Orlando Magic. Franz Wagner projected for 33% ownership. Wendell Carter Jr., 17%. Banchero up to 20%. And the usage for Banchero has been massive to this point. But also, injury news on this side of the game. Mo Wagner, Gary Harris, Cole Anthony, Markelle Fultz, Jalen Suggs, Jonathan Isaac. They are all out for the Orlando Magic. And everybody is gravitating towards these same 3 players, at least as of now for Orlando. Once again, that is Banchero projected for 20% ownership, Wendell Carter Jr. 17%, Wagner up to 33%. What do you make of this also shorthanded Orlando team?
I mean, there's a lot of usage to go around here, and obviously, Banchero is likely to lead the way. He's projected for 20% ownership. This is the first time all year, I think, where we've seen him getting ownership, but it makes sense because you're talking about somebody that has north of a 30% usage rate anyway, and now you're taking out Cole Anthony. So that is going to open up a lot. Suggs is still out, so you don't have him stepping in to take that usage. So, going back to the start of last season, without Cole Anthony or Jalen Suggs on the floor, Franz Wagner has a 24% usage rate, only 0.9 DraftKings points per minute. He hasn't been efficient, but the opportunities have been there. Wendell Carter Jr. is at 1.2 DraftKings points per minute with nearly a 24% usage rate. Again, a lot of those minutes are without Banchero since he is a rookie this year. 59 minutes for Banchero this year, 33.8% usage rate, 15.2% assist percentage without those two on the floor. Wagner has a 28.9% usage rate and a 31% assist percentage without those two on the floor in his 74 minutes this year. So I think both of those guys look really good. Again, right now, probably pulling a little bit more ownership than I would like, particularly in the case of Wagner at 33%, but it's early. Don't worry about that too much. I think he does look like a good play. Wendell Carter Jr. looks good as well. Probably a little bit more difficult to get to just because he is center only, and we never have a shortage of center options.
Yeah, and once again, ownership, just to mention again, some of this is going to change as more plays open up. At least as of now, when I was running my lineups, I mean, I was still getting to a bunch of these three guys, Banchero, Wendell Carter Jr., Franz Wagner, all three projected really well for me on a points per dollar basis. And Banchero at this point, it's hard to know what to make of a rookie and what their actual fantasy points per minute is going to look like, what the role is going to look like. It's hard to think anything other than Banchero is going to be a fantasy monster this year because he's filling up the stat sheet in multiple categories, and the usage is massive every game. He's had a usage of 30% or more in every game but one this year, and that one game was 24%. So I don't know what Banchero's fair price is going to be at the end of the year, but at least as of now, I think there's still pretty clearly upside in it.
Yeah, and he's contributing in other ways too. 16% assist percentage this year, 12.2% rebounding percentage, 1.2 DraftKings points per minute with a 31% usage rate overall. So not scoring dependent, and it's not like his fantasy production's been driven by elite efficiency either. 56% true shooting, no red flags there. So I do think that Banchero is a very good fantasy option. It's just that, for a lot of the season, it's kind of been like, oh, well, he's already correctly priced. But here, the price tag is about what it had been, and now you're taking Cole Anthony out as well.
Today's show is sponsored by Prize Picks. And if you guys haven't signed up at Prize Picks yet, if you do it by clicking on the link below in the description box, get up to $100 bonus on your first deposit. And we've got all of the tools over at Stokastic that are going to help you build winning player prop cards over at Prize Picks. Odd Shopper is a really good resource just to be able to look at the different projections we have for each player on different player props, projected odds of them going over and under each of those player props based on our simulations. So a couple things here. You're going to get $100 up to for free when you sign up by clicking on the link below. And then we've also got all the ways for you to make extra money over on Prize Picks. So check it out and sign up by clicking on the link below. Now, moving on to the next game, we have the Indiana Pacers against the Washington Wizards. And starting with the Pacers side of the game, I've rostered a lot of Halliburton this year, but now Miles Turner's back in the mix. It's another player to take some usage. And with the amount of value on the slate, I just don't really think there's going to be a whole lot of need to get to anything from this side of the game.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much where I'm at as well. Obviously, if you get to some Halliburton, that's fine at 8,300. Just an elite assist guy that also has a usage rate in the mid to upper 20s. The ceiling is always going to be there for him, but I do think he's pretty much correctly priced. And then you do also have the fact that he plays for the Pacers. So there's always some non-zero chance that the rotation gets really weird or he just doesn't play quite as many minutes as other guys in that price range. So right now we have him projected for 10% ownership. That seems fine. But I think he's kind of comparable to like Cade Cunningham for me, where I think he's a good play. There's also just a lot of good plays in that price range. So it's unlikely that I end up just like jamming any of them in specifically.
Yeah, I've generally played Halliburton more than Cunningham this year, but if Jaden Ivey's ruled out, Cunningham's just going to project much better for me based on his rates with Ivey off the court this year. So Halliburton, I think that there is wiggle room for him to have upside at his price point, but it's just not going to be necessary on this slate. I think there's ultimately going to be better plays. And then on the other side of this game, I'm kind of confused by some of the ownership. Monty Morris projected for 14% ownership. Denny Avdia projected for 11% ownership. I think they're about fairly priced, and I'm kind of confused by the field is getting there right now.
Yeah, I think Avdia is the kind of guy that pretty quickly disappears as value opens up throughout the day. 4,200 is a reasonable price tag, but I think that ownership kind of just goes away. You do have DeLon Wright out for Washington, which could have an impact, a positive impact on guys like Denny Avdia and Will Barton. Typically, the rotation that we'd seen this year is that Wright would back up Monte Morris, and then Barton and Avdia were basically, one of them was going to be in the closing lineup in place of the other. It wouldn't be surprising now if they use one of those guys as the backup. They could also, use Beal as the backup, which will kind of have the same effect in opening minutes. So I'm not sure if they'll go to like a different backup point guard or if it's just going to turn into some combination of Beal, Avdia, Barton running point with the second unit. So I do think some minutes open up for Denny Avdia. Also, for Monte Morris, it's 5,500. He's basically been splitting minutes with DeLon Wright. I think it's likely you get 30 plus from Monte Morris here. 5,500 looks good right now. I think by the time lock rolls around, it's going to look very average.
And then as for the pay up options, we got Bradley Beal, we got Kristaps Porzingis, and these guys look massively different on FanDuel as compared to DraftKings. Beal is $7,800 on FanDuel. Porzingis is $7,200 on FanDuel. So the DK price points, Beal is at 8,600, Porzingis at 79. I think those are about fair. The FanDuel price points look ridiculous to me. Does it feel the same to you?
Yeah, they're a little cheap. I mean, Beal's not playing the same role in terms of usage this year that he has in the past, but he still has a 25% usage rate. It's not like he's just standing in the corner doing nothing. He's just not the 30% usage guy that we've seen in previous years. But that there's also been a trade-off there where he has nearly a 30% assist percentage. He's averaging about a fantasy point per minute. Obviously, you would like that to come up a little bit, but at sub 8K on FanDuel, he's going to look good. Kristaps Porzingis has a 24% usage rate, 14.4% rebounding percentage. As long as he can avoid foul trouble, he's going to look like a good option, especially at only 7,200 with power forward eligibility on FanDuel. So I think those guys look better there. I think Porzingis probably is the easier of the two to get to since he does have MPE, whereas Beal is only shooting guard eligible. And we know that there's always a ton of really good shooting guards in that range. So even if you do think Beal's a little bit underpriced, it's probably not going to be enough to just like start jamming him ahead of all of these other guards. Whereas Porzingis just sitting there at 7,200 at power forward is going to really stand out.
Yeah, when I was running builds this morning, Porzingis is one of my most rostered players on FanDuel just because that price is so cheap for a guy that I project right around 40 fantasy points. And also, his scoring is just more favorable for FanDuel scoring compared to DraftKings anyway because of the blocks and the steals bonuses. So Porzingis, kind of regardless of what other value opens up, he's going to be somebody I would get to a lot on FanDuel at $7,200. Anything else about this game that stands out to you?
Nope.
All right, let's move on to the Cleveland-Boston game. And also, I see a couple more people starting to file in and saying good morning. As you guys come in, do us a favor, like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Now, starting with the Cleveland side of this game, Darius Garland, there was some optimism that he was potentially going to be back today, but that looks like it is not going to be the case. He's been ruled out. So no Darius Garland creates still more opportunity for Donovan Mitchell, but he's pretty expensive at this point. We're no longer getting the same price discount on FanDuel and DraftKings. Is Mitchell still somebody you're looking to pay up for in a tough matchup?
Yes and no. Like I'm still happy to get to him, but 9,200 guard eligible. There's just again, he looks like a lot of other guys. He's only getting 3% ownership right now, so he's someone where in a lineup here or there he fits in. Certainly has the ceiling, but it's just hard to prioritize him at the expense of guys that project just like he does.
Yeah, and the other issue too, the matchup. This game is one of the lower totals on the slate. Boston is one of the best defenses in the NBA. So I do think it's a little bit of uphill sledding for Donovan Mitchell relative to some other pay up options we have. So at least when I was running lineups this morning, didn't really get to him a whole bunch. Didn't really get to anybody from Cleveland though. Are there any players that stand out to you?
No, not at all. And it's not just me. I mean, looking at the projected ownership right now, Evan Mobley leads the way on DraftKings at 4%. It's kind of just a team full of guys where, Evan Mobley, Jared Allen, Donovan Mitchell, we know all of these guys have upside. Kevin Love at 4,700 if he gets the minutes. Karis LeVert at 6,200. We know all of these guys are talented players and capable of just walking into a big fantasy game, but there's just nothing about them in this spot that suggests they should be somebody that you should be building your night around.
Yeah, and I didn't really love the other side of the game either. Jason Tatum, sure, some shares of him at 8,600 on DK, 10.5 on FanDuel is a little bit steep. Jaylen Brown's also really expensive now. Jaylen Brown is up to $8,400 over on DK. He's $8,200 over on FanDuel. So some shares here and there of Tatum is always going to be sensible, but there's no priority plays on either side of this game for me.
Yeah, the only guys pulling ownership from Boston are Brogdon and Smart. And I think it's kind of like Monte Morris, where right now a $4,800 Brogdon or a $5,500 Smart seems useful, but there's a very good chance by the time we get closer to lock, it's going to be very mediocre. So I don't really have a ton of interest in any of this. Looking back at their last game, you got 22 minutes from Brogdon. Derek White played 25 to 26. Marcus Smart played 33, would have played more if it weren't for garbage time. Brogdon probably plays more without garbage time as well. So, again, right now, I think Smart and Brogdon look fine, but it's just very unlikely that they still look that way by tonight.
All right, let's move to another game that also I don't really have a whole ton of interest in. The Philadelphia 76ers are playing the Toronto Raptors. The total in this game is 212.5, which is by far the lowest on the slate. For reference, the second lowest total is the game we just talked about, Cleveland Boston, and that was at 217. So looking at nearly a 5-point difference in terms of the expected points to be scored in this game. Not a lot of possessions. James Harden's price has gone up. He was really cheap to start the year. That's not really the case anymore. From the Philly side of the game, there's always going to be some individual upside in Embiid and Harden, but I'm going to prefer spending up for other players.
Yeah, agreed. They both look correctly priced. I don't think either one is particularly easy to get to given all of the other options today. Embiid's pulling 8% ownership, Harden's at 2. Again, like obviously you're never wrong for playing a low on Embiid or Harden, but it's just going to be difficult for me to prioritize. Tyrese Maxey coming off of a massive game, 6,200. We know the type of ceiling he has, but it's just, again, I think going to be hard to really want to get to him on this particular slate in a really unappealing matchup.
And same for the other guys on the team as well. Like, we've got, you mentioned Tyrese Maxey, Tobias Harris. I just think it's going to be really difficult for Harris to find upside this year. He's a fairly scoring dependent player when he's playing with Joel Embiid, James Harden, and Tyrese Maxey, who are all going to have more usage than him. So there's no role players here that I think I could reliably get to from the 76ers. I'll probably get 0% of all of them.
Yeah, I mean, same for me as far as not being able to prioritize anything. DeAnthony Melton's getting some ownership right now. Again, by lock, there is basically no chance DeAnthony Melton matters.
On the other side of the game, when it comes to the Toronto Raptors, Scotty Barnes, he returned to the lineup last game. And the one benefit that we have with the Toronto Raptors is that we know the starters, the core guys for the team. Nick Nurse is going to play them a ton of minutes. That's something that he has always done, even in the regular season in games when they're kind of lower leverage. So one player that I'm getting to, and this is more DraftKings specific, and the only player I'm really getting any kind of meaningful exposure to in this game is Scotty Barnes. The $6,500 price tag is reasonable, but also he's point guard and small forward eligible. So he fits into so many different lineup spots that even in the poor game environment, he's somebody to me that I'm going to be getting some exposure to because of the price point and also the position eligibility.
Yeah, I'm there with you. I don't think he's like somebody that I'm playing tons of, but like you said, point guard, small forward makes it easy to get him into lineups. He's averaged 1.09 DraftKings points per minute so far this year. Played about 32 minutes in his first game back, his first game back. So no real reason to think that he's going to be limited by injury here. And like if you compare him to, we talked about Kelly Oubre and Gordon Hayward in the earlier game. I prefer both of those guys, but they're also getting twice the ownership right now that Scotty Barnes is. So it just stands out as a situation where in any given lineup where you need to save some ownership, just moving what would have been your Gordon Hayward to Scotty Barnes is going to make sense because they do have a very similar range of outcomes, even if Hayward projects a little bit better.
Yeah, and then as far as FanDuel goes, as much as I was running lineups, I was getting to him some on DK. I wasn't on FanDuel because his FanDuel position eligibility, power forward, small forward, but he's also $7,100. So a little bit of a price increase over on FanDuel. So the only thing that I really was getting to was Scotty Barnes, and that was specific to DraftKings. Does anything else about the Raptors stand out to you on this slate?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Like Pascal Siakam deserves a mention just because of what he's doing this year. He's got nearly a 31% usage rate, a 36% assist percentage, a 13.5% rebounding percentage. He's averaging 1.34 DraftKings points per minute. The guy is doing everything, and he's playing a lot of minutes. The issue is that on DraftKings, he's 8,900, which is fine, but he's also only a center. And so it just becomes really difficult when you combine the $8,900 price tag with the opportunity cost of that position. There is massive, massive upside for this guy, though. It just becomes kind of difficult to get a lot of him because he is very efficiently priced.
Yeah, I think that does make a whole lot of sense because we've seen Siakam now. Where's this price to start the year?
Like 7,500 or something.
Yeah, so he's gone up, a considerable amount in salary since the start
of
the year.
To be fair, he was also wildly underpriced at 7,500.
And he also has just poor position eligibility. If he was actually, I don't understand why he isn't power forward center. Like he should be power forward center, and that is something that inhibits him as well.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think he's playing the four at all this year, but it's kind of surprising that like they switched it that quickly or just never gave it to him. But yeah, if you tell me he's 8,900 with power forward center, then it's just like, oh, this is, a 15% owned play and he looks really good. Just center though, it just becomes so difficult to play a lot of him, even though the ceiling is there.
Next game to talk about here, we've got the New York Knicks against the Milwaukee Bucks. And the Knicks are coming off a game where it was that same game against the Hornets. So it went to overtime. And there was a massive stat line for Jalen Brunson in the game. It was his first really massive game with the New York Knicks. So Brunson in that spot ended up scoring over 60 fantasy points, played over 40 minutes. He had only a 19% usage rate, but he made 10 of 15 of his shots from the field. He had 13 assists. He had 7 rebounds, did a little bit of everything for the Knicks. The matchup is tough today against the Bucks. Is he somebody you're looking to get back to at all today?
So first, I just wanted to correct myself. I looked closer at like the rotations from last game. There was a stint where Siakam was playing with Boucher and Achua. So yeah, he's playing like 3 through 5, mostly the 5. But yeah, he should have MPE. As far as getting back to Brunson, like the ceiling certainly is there. He was someone I'd mentioned last game as a reasonable pivot at similar ownership to, or at a similar price tag to Dennis Smith Jr. I think it's kind of the same thing today, where it's going to be difficult to rely on him. And his price tag did go up a bit, so now he's $1,000 more expensive than Dennis Smith Jr. It's going to be difficult to rely on him, game to game at that price tag, but he's still certainly going to get plenty of opportunities for this team. So, again, not somebody I plan on building around. Don't even know if I'll get to him, but he has been productive this year. 1.2 DraftKings points per minute, 23% usage, 34% assist percentage. He looks good. I think the price is just pretty much where it should be.
And one thing also that's kind of annoying about the Knicks, at least as far as DraftKings goes, all of their starting players are only eligible at one position. Randall, power forward, Brunson, point guard, Barrett, small forward, Mitchell Robinson, center, Fournier. So that does also limit the amount of spots you could play the Knicks and just makes them a little bit harder to get to overall. So for me, the player I got to the most when I was running lineups this morning was just Julius Randle. I think that him, particularly on DraftKings at $7,900, a little bit too cheap considering what his role has been this year. The usage has remained high. He still has the ball in his hands and he's creating assists. The rebounding opportunities have been there. So I do like getting to Julius Randle. And for what it's worth, he said that playing alongside Jalen Brunson has made offense much easier for him. I don't know if there's anything to that or not, but Randle has played quite a bit better this year than last year. So Randle, one player that does stand out to me a little bit from the Knicks side.
Yeah, Randall's kind of interesting to me because on the one hand, the $7,900 price tag on Julius Randle is it just stands out as being different than what we normally get and being cheap. I am a little bit concerned by the impact Brunson's had on his assist numbers though. He only has a 12.9% assist percentage this year. He is second on the team in potential assists, but he's averaging 8 potential assists per game compared to 13.5 for Brunson. So I do think that playing with an actual point guard has cut into his overall fantasy production a bit. This is somebody that in the past you would just get everything from, and you're still getting some assists, and the price tag dropped as well. So I do think he's a little bit different DFS player this year than he has been in the past, but he's still averaging 1.1 DraftKings points per minute. He's still going to play a lot of minutes, and that is a pretty favorable price tag.
Yeah, so that's the one guy that does stand out to me as being most underpriced on the Knicks. It's hard to get to anybody else. Any other role players here or just anybody else on the Knicks do you think warrants ownership?
No, not really. If somehow value doesn't open up and you want to gamble on some $4,400 quickly, that's fine, but you shouldn't be overly confident in it. It can just pay off really well if it works.
On the other side of the game, when it comes to the Bucks, I think that as of right now, if you were just to build lineups, it would seem a little difficult to get to Giannis. But my assumption is later on in the day, there's going to be so much value on this slate that I'm going to get to a whole bunch of Giannis. So on FanDuel, where the pricing is softer, yeah, I get to him a little bit as of now, but I hardly got to any Giannis lineups this morning. I think by later on the day, he'll end up being one of my more rostered players just because it's going to be so easy to get to him once players are rolled out.
Yeah, I think it's the same kind of thing. Like right now on DraftKings, we only have him projected at 6% ownership because he's $12,100 and we don't have a ton of value at the moment. Most of the value we have is more so like mid-range guys that are playing without somebody else. So they look good. Like for example, the Charlotte guys that we talked about, but we haven't talked about a lot of, really cheap guys that look good. There's a good chance though that some of that opens up. The one caveat is the game where we're expecting it to open up the most is a 10 o'clock game. So we might actually not have that news by lock, but there's a pretty good chance that value opens up somewhere. It's an 11 game slate. It's the NBA. Some team is going to do something dumb and open up value. So basically, Giannis looks great. He's averaging 1.9 DraftKings points per minute this year, has a 38% usage rate, 34% assist percentage, nearly a 20% rebounding percentage. He looks fantastic. It's just a matter of, does the value open up to get to him or not?
I think we could talk about that also. What would you be doing if we get to these games, like the 8 o'clock games? Because there's some of them grouped together here. We've got Knicks Bucks, next one Lakers Timberwolves, and there's the Spurs Bulls game. What would you do if we head into all these games and we still have all the players listed as questionable in the 10 o'clock game between the Pelicans and the Suns?
I'm not totally sure. So I think I'm probably going to project. So like if we're assuming that, those guys are questionable, I'll probably just assume that they're in until they're not, and then plan on spending my Friday night late swapping every half hour.
Oh, which is always the best way to spend your Friday nights. If this is the kind of slate where if you have plans, you probably shouldn't be playing, if we're being honest.
Yeah, agreed. Especially Rinpek and I were talking about it yesterday too. I think it is, sort of worth noting. Obviously, every DFS sport gets tougher and tougher every year. People are just, using projections more and making better lineups. There has been a noticeable edge in DFS so far, in NBA so far, though, when there has been late news. You had the slate where Usman Garuba remained 33% owned off the bench. You had, Scotty Barnes, not that he was like a fantastic play last slate, but he was 0.8% owned simply because he was questionable, going into the 7 o'clock games, and people weren't sure if he was going to play. That's somebody that normally would be, 5 to 8% owned. So there have certainly been a lot of spots where guys end up being under-owned, over-owned. And so that is one edge that I think just very clearly does still exist in NBA.
And I don't think it's going away either, because it's a kind of thing where people have lives that aren't us, and they have things they like to do outside of just sitting at their computer playing DFS. So if you guys are somebody who's home, you're really glued to your screens and checking all the injury news, make sure you're late swapping. And I know a lot of you know this already, but this is probably the biggest edge that exists in any DFS sport. Like Adam said the other day, the big one was the Usman Garuba, who did look like he was a really good play on that slate when we assumed he was starting. Then he came off the bench. I was sitting here, I was just hanging out on Zoom with Eric, and we are like, okay, well, is Garuba's ownership even going to change now? Because he's still projected okay, and people just didn't want to take him out of lineups. And that's what we're seeing happen when we're seeing players that are either seeing a change of roles. Another one, too, which is also the Rockets, the Şengün. Remember when Garuba first started over Şengün? Şengün was still like 38% owned on that slate, or 37% in the $15. I forget what the exact number is. So, I mean, late swap is probably the biggest the biggest edge that exists in any DFS sport right now.
Fernando was 1% owned in his initial start too. And like, that was a spot where I was like, oh, I'm not going to bother. And then he went nuts. But like, yeah, I kind of had the same conversation with Josh about Garuba. I was like, I'm not positive his projection changes a ton, but at the very least, his downside becomes a lot higher and his ownership's not going to move. So like, he's just naturally over owned. Yeah. And like, you could even see it on Twitter, like there were, somebody tweeted sort of mocking the Garuba ownership, and like people were replying like, oh, thanks SaberSim or thanks Stokastic or whatever, like with the projections. It's like people just aren't reacting to the fact that things change with starting lineups.
Yeah, and the other thing too, because people were saying like, oh, how come you guys told us that you liked Garuba? Well, we thought he was starting then, and then the show ends, and then an hour later something else happens. So I think there's also something to be said for, number one, keeping up on the injury news, and then also, if you guys are Stokastic members and you're in our Discord channel, you could always at me and ask questions and say like, oh, this player is not starting. What does that mean? Should I change anything? Like, that's another good resource, because stuff is going to change after shows end. And it's kind of hard for us to communicate that when we don't know that's going to happen when we're doing a show. And does anything else from getting back to these games, does anything else from Milwaukee stand out to you outside of Giannis?
No. Jrue Holiday averaging about a fantasy point per minute. Also relatively expensive at 8,100. Like, he's fine, but it's just really difficult for me to want to play him instead of Tyrese Halliburton or Cade Cunningham, for example, especially if Jaden Ivey were to sit. Bobby Portis had a monster game last time out, 5,500. You're going to get, volatile minutes from him. He did close, so he got to 26 minutes. That easily could have been 22 minutes. That's kind of what we've been seeing from him off the bench. Not any sort of a priority, but at least he is a good point per minute guy.
All right, let's start getting into some of the more fun injury news, because the next game is the Lakers and the Timberwolves. From the Lakers side of the game, shocking. Anthony Davis questionable. Russell Westbrook also questionable after missing last game with a hamstring injury. How would LeBron look tonight if neither AD nor Westbrook play?
He would look absolutely fantastic. I thought he looked fantastic last game, and he didn't really come through. But I talked about it before the last game. Going back to last season, when LeBron has played with, yeah, so when LeBron has played with Westbrook and Davis on the floor, he's been a 1.2 fantasy point per minute guy. When he has played with Davis on and Westbrook off, he's been a 1.4 fantasy point per minute guy. And when he has played with both guys off, he's around 1.55 DraftKings points per minute. So to put that into context, LeBron without Davis or Westbrook is basically the same fantasy producer as Jokic when Jamal Murray is on the floor. That's how good LeBron has been without those guys. So if Westbrook were to sit and Davis plays, you're talking about, like a chunk of minutes where he's playing without Davis. But if they both sit, you're just talking about basically Nikola Jokic at LeBron's price tag.
And then we saw the situation last game without Russell Westbrook, and Austin Reeves ended up starting Patrick Beverley. There's more opportunity for him without Westbrook. But what happens if Anthony Davis sits? Are there any big men that would open up as value options?
Potentially. I don't know who they are because
That's what I'm struggling with also.
What'd you say?
That's what I'm struggling with also, because they've played Matt Ryan off the bench. Do you know anything about this guy, Matt Ryan?
I know he can shoot.
He last year he was a DoorDash driver, and he worked grave shifts like at a cemetery, overnight shifts. And now he's playing for the Lakers. So and that's one of their first go-to guys off the bench when they need floor spacing.
Right.
But that's also what makes it really hard to know what happens if Anthony Davis is out. Do they go to Damian Jones starting at center? He hasn't even really been a big part of the rotation as of late. He could potentially start though, and he could play 20 to 25 minutes. So I really don't know what happens to the Lakers rotation if Anthony Davis is out. I think I just kind of have to wait to see what the starting lineup is.
Yeah, I mean, Damian Jones was the backup to Davis last game, and then you are playing a big Minnesota team. So, like, my guess right now would be Damian Jones. I've already been wrong on Damian Jones once this year and had to pay $50 for it. So I'm not very confident in this, but based on the rotation last game and the matchup, Damian Jones getting the start is my guess. I don't know. I'm also guessing Davis plays for now, but yeah, Damian Jones would be my guess if Davis sits, but it could be a lot of people.
And then on the other side of this game, the Minnesota Timberwolves, a lot of these guys individually, I think there's reason to think there's upside, but it's another one of these spots where I don't know that I'm going to be able to prioritize any of them until somebody gets hurt. So if you had a share or two of Cat, Rudy Gobert, Russell, Edwards, it's reasonable. I wouldn't tell anybody you have to swap them out of your lineups, but none of them are going to be in more than a couple of lineups or so for me.
Yeah, it's just they all have upside individually because you're going to get in any individual game, Anthony Edwards taking over like you saw last game, or Karl Anthony Towns having a big offensive game, or D'Angelo Russell or whatever. But on average, like all four of these guys, Anthony Edwards, 1.1 DraftKings points per minute. Rudy Gobert, 1.1 DraftKings points per minute. D'Angelo Russell, 1.1 DraftKings points per minute. Karl Anthony Towns, 1.12 DraftKings points per minute so far this year. Just four guys that on average are basically just they're going to project well, but not great. I do like Edwards just because he started off the year in a bit of a shooting slump. He snapped out of it last game. I think he jumped his true shooting percentage like 7 points for the season in his last game, knocked down like, I don't know, 4 threes in the first quarter or something. But he does have a 29% usage rate to lead the team, also has a 19% assist percentage and a 10% rebounding percentage. So like he would be the one I think that I look to first. He also has guard forward eligibility, which is really nice. But 7,200 for D'Angelo Russell sort of looks good too, given the 30% assist percentage and the fact that he has a 24% usage rate. So it's a good spot. It's a lot of really talented players. It's just very difficult to point to one and say like, this is the guy that should be getting tons of ownership. Because if I tell you that Anthony Edwards should be getting a ton of ownership, that suggests that like, I really like him over Tyrese Halliburton, or I really like him over Cade Cunningham. And that's not the case. They all just look like good plays.
Yeah, it's something. It's a team I very highly doubt on big slates I'll get to a lot of exposure to, and especially not on this one where you have a lot of options. Next game is the Chicago Bulls against the San Antonio Spurs. Do you think Zach LaVine is going to play today? Because this is the front end of a back-to-back. It seems unlikely that he would play back-to-backs, just given that they've already held him out twice for rest. And today, the Bulls are playing the Spurs. Tomorrow, they play against the 76ers. So just kind of looking at the matchups, it seems more likely to me that LaVine would rest and play tomorrow than the other way around. But do you have any kind of read on that?
My guess is he would sit, but I'm not going to pretend like I have any idea what they're doing with Zach LaVine. I've been entirely confused since game one.
Yeah, I've never seen a player get ruled out for rest for the first 2 games of the season. It was
And then be
very
fine to come back and play 30 plus minutes.
yeah,
Like,
that to me also where I'm looking at the Bulls where Levine misses the first couple of games for rest. I'm like, oh, this team might really be fucked this year. Lonzo Ball is already out. Zach Levine apparently already dealing with knee soreness. And then not only did he come back and play full minutes, he played well and looked good. So it is a little bit of a weird situation, but still, I think we should talk about the possibility of him not playing and how that would impact the other players on the team. So how would the other guys on the Bulls, like DeRozan, like Vooch, look if Zach LaVine ends up resting?
you get a nice bump if Levine doesn't play. I'm pulling up those numbers now since the start of last season, but DeRozan's usage gets to some absurd number, like 35% without Lonzo or Levine on the floor. Vooch gets a bump as well, which isn't surprising. They both would look better right now from a pricing standpoint. On DraftKings, you have Vooch coming in at 8,300, so a reasonable price tag. DeRozan 8,900, able to play him at both forward spots. That would look good. So overall, since the start of last season, DeRozan 30.9% usage, 1.18 DraftKings points per minute. Vooch 1.2 DraftKings points per minute, 24% usage. If you take off Lonzo and you take off Levine, I think DeRozan jumps like 5 points in usage. So nope, that didn't take off Levine. Yeah, so he jumps to like 36.5%. So DeRozan's usage rate jumps like 6 points when you take those two guys off. 36.6% usage, 1.3 DraftKings points per minute. Vooch, 27% usage, so that's 3 points higher than his average, 1.26 DraftKings points per minute. Both of these guys certainly look a lot better if Levine sits.
Yeah, and once again, we don't know that for sure. I'm just kind of making an educated guess that I think he is going to sit today, but unconfirmed. So like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, check out the deep dive and lie before lock later, because I think there's a pretty good chance at the 1:30 injury report update or maybe the 5:31, we'll get more official word on Zach LaVine. And on the other side of the game, there's also injury news, as is the case with pretty much all of the late games today. Devin Vassell, he is out. Joshua Primo, he is also out. The Spurs have been the most chalky team. I'm not totally sure on that. I'm just guessing. I think that's right, though. This is the team that's had the most ownership to this point this year. And there's once again injury news, but the pricing a little bit better now. We're starting to see Keldon Johnson more expensive, Jakob Poeltl, Trey Jones, Josh Richardson is no longer close to min price. Does anything stand out to the Spurs now that they've gotten price increases?
I think that there's still some value there, just not to the same extent that there was the other day. $5,400 for Josh Richardson is more correct. We have him projected for 28.3 DraftKings points, so probably should be priced around 5,400. Still a reasonable option. Trey Jones didn't get nearly as much of a bump, just went up like $500 from 5,500. He was disappointing last game, but also you're going to get an ownership discount here too. So I think Trey Jones looks fine, still getting like 18% ownership. Poeltl looks solid at 6,800, but obviously there's a lot of good center options to compete with. So San Antonio now to me just looks like they look kind of like the Hornets, where there's a bunch of plays that should be like 15 to 20% owned that look good. Whereas the other day it was just like, I can't get away from these guys because they are completely underpriced and have more minutes and everything available. Now it's just the price tags have adjusted at least a little bit.
Yeah, the one that remains a little bit too cheap, Josh Richardson, is still only $4,800 over on FanDuel. So he's projected for nearly 40% ownership. The other guys, Keldon Johnson, $7,200, Trey Jones, $6,000 on FanDuel. So they have priced up the other ones, but Richardson at least at $4,800 on FanDuel. What do you make of him when he's also projected for nearly 40% ownership?
On FanDuel?
Yeah.
Let me pull that up.
Yeah, so right now, Richardson,
so,
39.4% ownership.
Yeah, 4,800 still, I mean, it's not expensive. It's obviously a better price than you're getting on DraftKings. 40% ownership for Richardson still seems like a lot, just given that there's typically, at least like yesterday, there were a lot of underpriced players on FanDuel that didn't exist on DraftKings. I think it's probably the case again today. So I get why he's getting that much ownership, but probably a little bit more than I would like. He's played 76 minutes without Devin Vassell this year, 0.85 DraftKings points per minute, 13.8% usage rate, 21% assist percentage. It's not like he's getting any massive bumps in rates or anything. You're just talking about most likely getting more playing time. So I think probably going a bit over owned at that price on FanDuel, even though it is a favorable price tag.
The next game here, the Utah Jazz against the Denver Nuggets. And Utah has been one of the better teams to target at this point this year, but the pricing now has gone up a little bit. We've got Lauri Markkanen, $7,100 on DK. He was way too cheap on DK for a little while, $7,200 on FanDuel. It's also a fairly difficult matchup on the road against Denver. This is one of the teams that I'm getting the least amount of exposure to, and it's one of the teams that I have gotten the most amount of exposure to this point. But I just don't really love a whole lot of what I'm seeing from Utah, at least for this one particular slate.
Yeah, I think it's kind of just difficult on this particular slate. The pricing is still fine. 6K for Kelly Olynyk, 7,100 for Lauri Markkanen. Neither one is drastically overpriced, but this is a team that's been really popular because they've gotten to play the Rockets back-to-back games. Now you're going into Denver, so not as appealing a matchup there. And then you're also just getting a slate where there are a lot of teams missing guys. And so, like in this 6 to 7K price range, you're already talking about Kelly Oubre, Gordon Hayward, Dennis Smith Jr. We haven't gotten to the Portland game, but there is a lot to like there. Potentially, guys on New Orleans. If we assume that, like, let's say Zion's out and CJ McCollum's in, McCollum's going to look great as a mid-range play. So you're just talking about a healthy Utah team where, is there upside individually for any of Clarkson, Olynyk, Markkanen, Conley, Vanderbilt? Absolutely. But they just aren't going to project nearly as well as a lot of guys around them in that price range because their team is healthy.
And we do have a couple players that are questionable. Colin Sexton is questionable. Walker Kessler also questionable. If either or both of them sit, does it open up any value in bench players that would make you want to roster them?
If Sexton sits, I guess that's probably good for Beasley. Like, Beasley played almost 30 minutes last game. He closed after Vanderbilt fouled out. Sexton didn't play at all in the second half last game. Talen Horton-Tucker was the backup to Conley. So Conley in the third quarter got in some foul trouble, subbed out within the first minute. Talen Horton-Tucker was the guy that subbed in for him, where normally that would be Colin Sexton. So if Sexton's out, I think it's good for Horton-Tucker, but he's already 4,500 too, so not enamored with that price, but would be more playable if Sexton is out. And then similarly with Beasley, 4,800, so already at a price point where it's going to be tough for me to want to do too much with that, but he is somebody that can play multiple positions. So as this team loses players, you could just see Beasley finding ways to get more minutes.
Yeah, I think it is also a spot where, let's say, a bunch of the New Orleans guys get ruled out. It kind of becomes irrelevant. But I wouldn't mind taking a shot on Talen Horton-Tucker. Say some of that other value wasn't to open up, but it looks like there's going to be better spots to target. And one of them could be potentially on the other side of this game because the Denver Nuggets, Michael Porter Jr., he sat out last game. He's questionable to play today. And KCP, who got hurt in that last game, he is also questionable. We saw Bruce Brown move into the starting lineup last game, ended up having a big fantasy game. How would he look today if neither KCP nor Michael Porter Jr. are playing?
Who did you ask about?
Bruce Brown.
He would look good. He's like a 0.85 DraftKings points per minute guy going back to his time in Brooklyn. And he's another one where, like, it's just always easy to give him minutes when players get ruled out because he can play every position. We saw him getting the start when Jamal Murray was out earlier this year. He started last game. If Porter's out again, I'd expect him to start again. If KCP's out, I would expect him to start. He's 5,400. He's 5,400, so it's not like it's a glaring value. He's another one that jumped $900, give or take, since last slate. But I expect the minutes to be there. I think he's still going to look like a pretty good value. His value relative to the slate will go down a bit if we were to get news that, like, nobody on the Pelicans is playing, for example. But 33 minutes last game in his start for Porter, lost about 3 minutes to garbage time. If either of those guys are out tonight, I would expect you're getting another, 34 to 36 minutes from Bruce Brown.
Yeah, and then also on the high end, Jokic is somebody who right now I get some exposure to. I think he, alongside Giannis, would be two players I'd end up getting to a whole bunch if we get that Pelicans news to break the right way, because it would not be difficult to pay up for guys like Jokic, Giannis, LeBron, if AD ends up being out. If we also see Michael Porter Jr. and KCP out for Denver, we know already that Jokic is just a crazy good fantasy producer. If you're going to take some other guys who are key pieces out of the mix for Denver, then we just see Jokic kind of back to what he was last year. So how does Jokic look as a pay-up option for you relative to some of the other pay-up options?
Yeah, I agree with what you said. I would rather get to Giannis. I think he's the better point per minute guy, but he's also $1,000 more expensive on DraftKings. To me, this is really similar to the last slate where when I did the strategy show, and even to some extent the deeper dive, I wasn't getting to Jokic. I wasn't getting to a ton of Giannis, but I was getting, to a lot more Giannis than Jokic. And then by the time lock came around, value had opened up. So I had, 15% Jokic and 30% Giannis or something like that. So right now, I wouldn't have much Jokic if the slate started, I don't think. But by lock, I think I will have a decent amount probably. Certainly would expect to get to more Giannis than Jokic though.
Yeah, if I remember correctly on that slate, I'm pretty sure both of them were my single entry lineup, Giannis and Jokic with a bunch of cheap players. That was the lineup that projected best for me on that slate, and there could end up being something similar like that today. But anybody else from Denver that stand out to you in the event that there is no Michael Porter Jr. or KCP?
Not that I'm really confident in. Like I've been trying to kind of figure out what the rotation would be. Like, does Bones Highland play more? That would mean playing him alongside Jamal Murray. Um, I don't really know what they do with the rotation if they're both out.
I'm still a little haunted by the slate where I correctly guessed that Jamal Murray was going to sit, and I was like, "Oh, sick! I've got all this exposure to Bones Highland and Ish Smith," and then it was Christian Braun was the first guy off the bench. I was like, "What the fuck is this?"
Yeah.
So there's, I think part of it too is it could be a number of guys, and it's going to be really hard to project. And the other thing too that was weird about that spot is Bones Highland's role literally did not change with Jamal Murray out. They just added other guys to the rotation. I kind of have a feeling that could be how Mike Mullen plays his benches, which would be really suboptimal for us in DFS.
Yeah, and you mentioned Christian Braun. I could easily see, like, if both of these guys are out, it just being like Braun and Brown, because it's not like they need to inject usage or ball handling into the starting lineup. You have Jamal Murray, you have Nikola Jokic. There's no real need for Bones Highland, even though as DFS players we would certainly prefer him to be getting minutes over Christian Braun. But it wouldn't surprise me at all if he just maintains that bench role as the scorer with the second unit, and then you're just getting Braun or others soaking up, Devon Reed soaking up minutes. That's actually what I would expect. Highland's played 9 minutes alongside Jamal Murray this year. Certainly could throw him into the starting lineup. It would just surprise me.
If you guys don't have an account at BetMGM yet, you're missing out because they are going to give you a chance for $200 for free when you sign up for the first time, and you're going to get $200. This is all you have to do. You sign up by clicking on the link below in the description box, and then when you head on over to BetMGM, you place a $10 moneyline bet on any NBA game. It pays out $200 as long as a team hits a three in that game. It's going to happen. There's been a three hit in every single game in my entire lifetime in the NBA. So there's going to be a three hit, and you're going to get $200 once that three is made in the game. All you have to do when you sign up is make sure to click on the link below in the description box so you get credited with that $200 when you first make your account over at BetMGM. Now let's move on to the next game, and it is one that is just going to be really hard to parse right now. The New Orleans Pelicans, to reiterate the injury report I read at the top of the show, Zion Williamson, CJ McCollum, Herb Jones, Jose Alvarado, and Dyson Daniels are all questionable to play. In terms of players that are out, Brandon Ingram remains out. Kira Lewis is also out. Adam, what do we make of this situation in a game that has a kind of unfortunate start time, 10 p.m. Eastern time? So on an island, well, not on an island, there's only one other 10 p.m. game. So possible for not a lot of late swap maneuverability if the news comes out really late.
Yeah, this is a really difficult one. Hopefully we get some, shoot around news and stuff like that, because this is really difficult because you don't want, or at least I don't want, I mean, you could and potentially have a really nice edge, but also just lose all your money. Like, you could just project these guys out and then hope that you're right and the news comes out late and you're just, cleaning up because you're like the only person with this value. But that's like a really risky approach. If they're questionable, I'm just going to assume that they're playing, and then, like I said earlier, late swap as I need to. But it's really, really difficult because it's not even like it's just the starters that are questionable. There's like so many iterations right now of how this could go. You have Herbert Jones, McCollum, and Williamson all questionable. But then, like, if McCollum's out, that means more Jose Alvarado, except Jose Alvarado also questionable. If Herbert Jones is out and McCollum's out, you could get more Dyson Daniels, who had a really nice game last time out. But Dyson Daniels also questionable, so who the hell knows? I don't know. Like, we need more information.
Do you think this is a reasonable way to handle it? Is maybe to go into Fantasy Cruncher and give a thumbs up to guys like Valanciunas and Trey Murphy, guys that we know are going to be in and have potential for upside anyway, just in case those guys get ruled out? Because it is hard to target the value guys who are going to be cheap, but maybe it's not as difficult to get to somebody like Valanciunas, for instance.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable approach. Like, the downside to that is, for example, let's say these guys are in, you're going to be ending up with like Joe Val instead of Vooch, say Levine's out. And obviously you would prefer Vooch, but like the potential upside is, all these guys get ruled out and you just have Valanciunas at 4% ownership, which would be fantastic. So yeah, I think that is one reasonable approach. Um, it's probably I probably like that one more than like trying to guess it at stuff, because you're just gonna get you're not really playing it halfway. Like I know that's something that people have done in the past, and it's just like, well, then you're just screwed either way. Like if the guys are in, you don't have the good players that are playing without Brandon Ingram, and then if they're out, obviously you don't have their backups. If you project them out, like if you just project the guys out, then you're going to get a lot of the backups, which gives you a really high ceiling, but it's really risky. So I do think the way that you mentioned makes some sense, just because like Murphy and Valanciunas, the worst case scenario is these guys are in and Valanciunas is not a great play, but like you can still get there.
Yeah, and then also in terms of the injuries, it's also hard to make any kind of guesses here. So Zion Williamson is just dealing with soreness basically. CJ McCollum has a sprained finger on his shooting hand. So it's not like these are serious injuries, but they're not insignificant either. And we know how cautious they've been with Zion. Like I have no good read on whether these players are going to sit or not. And I wouldn't even know how to go about guessing. Like yesterday, I was pretty confident Paul George was going to play. There's been other slates where I feel like I've had reads on who's going to be in or out. This is just kind of a mess.
Yeah, like I have absolutely no idea who plays here, who doesn't. Just based on the pure volume of questionable guys, I think it's likely that you're missing at least one of the main pieces here, outside of Ingram. When you have Jones, McCollum, and Zion questionable, it seems likely that one of them's going to sit, but no idea which one, and which one it is also impacts who you would want to
Yeah.
play. And then also again, Daniels and Alvarado are questionable, so that also impacts who I would want to play. There is a good chance that we get some sort of news, at least on one or two of these guys. Either it be shoot around or just the 5:30 injury report, 6:30 injury report, something like that.
And the other side of the game when it comes to the Phoenix Suns, there's no real considerable pricing value here. Once again, guys like Chris Paul, Devin Booker, individual upside, but I'm going to find it hard to prioritize these guys on a slate like this. Is it the same for you? And then also, would that change at all if a lot of value opens up on the New Orleans side and we're playing a lot of New Orleans players? Would that incline you to want to get some more Phoenix guys?
So as is right now, nothing that really stands out. You're just getting some ownership going to DeAndre Ayton at 7,100, who I do think looks good here. Chris Paul 7,300, pulling 12%. Booker pulling 6. All of those are fine. Clearly they're good players. They have very high ceilings. They are close to correctly priced, probably a little bit cheap on Ayton and Paul. If the Pels start ruling guys out, it makes it easier to get to more Booker, but like I wouldn't. I don't think I would get to more Suns just because I'm playing more Pels. Because if the Pels just like were to rule everybody out, you're just in one of those situations where the Pelicans have cheap players that can be tournament winning plays, even if it's not a particularly competitive game. Like the big reason why normally I'll set rules where like if I have three players from one team, I'll have somebody from the other team, is if I have three normally priced players from one team and they all have the game that I want them to have in tournaments, the game's going down to the wire and somebody on the other team is probably playing really well. Here, if you just, let's say McCollum and Zion and Jones are all out, you can easily have three guys from the Pels pay off their really cheap salaries and the Suns play three quarters.
Yeah, no, I think that totally makes sense. And also the size of the slate matters. So with 11
Yeah, that too.
games, it makes a difference where we're not necessarily needing to correlate players quite as much to find upside in some of those game stacks. But
Right. Like,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, like, I don't want to like move Devin Booker ahead of, like, let's say Levine is out, right? Like, I don't want to move Devin Booker ahead of DeMar DeRozan, or be forcing him into lineups ahead of DeMar DeRozan just because I'm playing Jose Alvarado, Dyson Daniels, and Jonas Valanciunas.
Yeah, no, that makes a whole lot of sense. One game left on the slate to talk about. It is the Houston Rockets against the Portland Trailblazers. And surprise, surprise, there's going to be a bunch of value when we talk about the Portland side. But first, as far as Houston goes, Kevin Porter Jr. and Jalen Green, they are both pulling some ownership. We also got Şengün back in the mix for this team. So Şengün was out for a couple games with an illness. He is now listed as probable. So I assume that he is going to be in. How does his return impact the front court for the Rockets?
It adds another body, another high usage body as well. So $5,500 price tag on Şengün. I'm assuming he comes off the bench and plays his normal, mid-20s role. There is some upside there at only 1% ownership. Again, it's tough to prioritize him just given that he's a center, and there's plenty of downside too. Like the minutes are gonna be volatile, but at 1%, that is kind of interesting. I expect that Garuba just pretty much disappears. You have Jayshawn Tate back. You still have Tari Eason. You still have KJ Martin. It's still going to be a mess in terms of this front court rotation, I think. Um, are you assuming Jabari Smith starts at center again?
Yes,
Okay.
I think so. He's just looked so much better there versus when he started at power forward. And long term, this team's goal, even Jalen Green has said it in interviews this year. He said that they're a rebuilding team and he views every game as a win, even if they don't win, as long as there's something they could pull away from each game as a learning lesson. And I think one thing that they've learned so far is that Jabari Smith is probably the best option at center for them. And then Şengün is somebody to come off the bench. Maybe they try the Şengün and Jabari Smith starting front court combination. It's something we haven't seen yet. But yeah, at least as of now, I do think they start Jabari Smith at center.
Yeah, so that's my expectation as well, is that you get the same starting lineup as last game, and then you get Şengün off the bench. Pulling up the rotation now, just kind of double check what they did last game. But you got 32 minutes from Smith. You got 20 from Jayshawn Tate. He was in some foul trouble, probably would have played a bit more. Kenyon Martin Jr. played like 25 minutes. I think that could take a bit of a cut with Şengün back. Garuba played 8 minutes. I would think that probably just goes away. Eason played 23. He probably gets back into like the mid-teens. Boban's 2 minutes certainly disappear, I think.
Yeah.
Um,
Unfortunately, I think the Boban minutes are gone.
yeah. So yeah, I think it's just sort of a situation where everybody becomes a little bit riskier just because you don't know exactly how this rotation is going to look. And by everybody, I mean the front court guys. Jalen Green and Kevin Porter Jr. are still going to get theirs. But I think they all just become a little bit riskier. But you still have good point per minute guys in Jabari Smith, in Şengün, that warrant consideration, in tournaments at least.
Actually, and there is a pretty good point in the YouTube chat being brought up here by SMP 1993. He said, do we think they start Smith at the 5 against Nurkic? It's not like it's Olynyk who they went against the past two. It is possible that because of the matchup, they decide they go bigger. So maybe we see the Şengün Jabari Smith combination, but it seems like they've been inclined to bring Şengün off the bench. But who knows? Maybe the matchup would mean that they go with a bigger lineup against Nurkic. But it's just as much of an issue for Jabari Smith to guard Nurkic as it is for Nurkic to guard Jabari Smith. Like that's a nightmare for Portland on defense also.
Yeah,
So
and so Josh had actually just messaged me the same thing SMP said, that he thinks that maybe they go with Şengün because of Nurkic. But the other thing, like, and certainly they could. The other thing is, one, like the Rockets, I don't know how much they care. But then two, like the whole reason Şengün doesn't play more is the guy can't defend. So, I get he's bigger than Jabari Smith, but if he's just going to get walked over by Nurkic anyway, is there really a point? So like he certainly could start at 5,500. If he does start, I would certainly like him more, just because that is a very good a very good sign for his playing time. Whereas if he comes off the bench, the playing time I think is just a little bit more volatile, and there's certainly more downside in terms of minutes. But yeah, he could start here. I just don't know how much the Rockets care, or if they even necessarily view it as an upgrade.
and then the final spot on this slate, we've got the Portland Trailblazers. At least as of now, this is the marquee value spot until we start to get news on who's going to be in, who's going to be out for the Pelicans. Because there's no Damian Lillard for the Blazers. He's expected to miss 1 to 2 weeks. Now, Dame said he doesn't think the injury is serious. He said that if it was the playoffs, he'd still be playing. But at least at this point in the season, no need to push it. Make sure he's healthy for the stretch of the year and for the later stages of the year. No need to play 1 or 2 games at the risk of 6 or 8 games at the end of the year. So without Damian Lillard in the mix, so many guys are projecting well for me here. Anthony Simons being an obvious one. There's more usage going to Nurkic. Josh Hart plays a bigger role, more usage for Jeremy Grant. Shaedon Sharpe, he played a big role off the bench last game after we saw Dame get hurt. What stands out the most to you from Portland?
Anthony Simons, I think, looks very good. Since the start of last season, without McCollum or Lillard on the floor, he's averaged 1.08 DraftKings points per minute. He's played 789 minutes, 28.5% usage rate, 29% assist percentage. He is 7,100 on DraftKings. That's just going to look like a really good price tag, I think. Projected for about 15% ownership. You mentioned Sharpe, 4,400 in the last game. He ended up playing 21 minutes after Lillard left. So he still kind of got garbage time there. So I don't know for sure what that's going to look like. It was actually Winslow that subbed in for him, and we have seen Winslow play pretty decent minutes this year. So he's somebody that I think at 3,900 is going to look like a good value. He's pulling 24% ownership right now, but I do think Sharpe probably plays a bigger role. Also, he's projected for 26% ownership. at $4,400. So I think Sharp and Winslow as value options are going to look good. Anthony Simons at 7,100 is going to look good. And then Nurk at 7,200. He's averaged 1.3 DraftKings points per minute, 547 minutes, 27% usage rate. And then we were just talking about it with Houston. You're either going to get a Houston front court that doesn't match up with Nurk in terms of rebounding, or you're going to get a Houston front court that can't defend Nurk, or both. So I think it sets up as a really, really good spot for Nurk, both because of the matchup and because of Lillard being out.
Yeah, no, I at least as of now, this is the team I get to the most exposure to by far. Winslow, Shada, like I'm overweight to almost every single player on this team when I was just running lineups based on what the projections are. Nurk, I was about close to the field on. He's projected for 16% ownership. I got to him at 14%. So that was the one guy I was a little bit underweight to. But then over on FanDuel, where he's priced at $6,800, I got to a ton of them there. So we'll see how this slate goes. But at least as of right now, one thing that does seem nice about me getting to a lot of Portland is if the injury news doesn't come out for New Orleans, it does look like I'm going to have enough exposure to Portland where I'm going to be able to make late swaps to some of those Pelicans guys anyway.
Yeah, I was going to say that if you didn't. It is kind of it is nice that at least the team that we're going to be getting a lot of is late. Like, it would suck if this was the first game and then it's just like, oh, cool, I got 30% Justice Winslow and the Pelicans have no players. So yeah, that is nice. And then also to kind of just keep going on this team too, Josh Hart, 434 minutes. 1.09 DraftKings points per minute, 24% usage rate without Lillard and McCollum since he came over. I think, at 6,600, he's priced up a bit, but there is still some upside there. We've seen Jeremy Grant capable of taking on a big offensive role going back to his time in Detroit. There's a lot of upside to be had here from Portland, even if it's not the main pieces. Like, even looking at Hart and Grant, I think give you pretty nice ceilings in lineups where like maybe you're not getting Nurkic and Simons.
And that is going to do it for us today, guys. Check out all the rest of the content we have on the YouTube channel. Got a couple NFL shows coming up later on the day, NBA Deeper Dive, NBA Live Before Lock. So make sure you're up to date on all of the NBA injury news that happens. Also, before you guys leave, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. See you later.